This is an ongoing investigation, and we're in the process of looking at indices, files, and to see exactly what we knew about this gentleman and when we knew it.
Attorney General Eric Holder there talking about the Times Square terror suspect Faisal Shahzad. The press was all over this developing story as details about the bungled terror plot emerged, but then some of the mainstream media coverage took a turn.
Faisal Shahzad seemed to be living the American dream. Wife, 2 kids, nice house in the suburbs. Even his signature seems to suggest optimism. It appears a heart is dotting the I in Faisal.
It can be confirmed that his house was foreclosed on in recent years. I mean, one would have to imagine that that brought a lot of pressure and a lot of heartache.
He became a U.S. citizen just a year ago, but he has not realized any American dream. He quit his job, lost his house, and was separated from his family.
Headlines like these followed as well from the AP. Times Square bombing suspect's life unraveled. From the Sydney Morning Herald, loner failed in search for American dream. From Newsday, Faisal Shahzad's home was in foreclosure. And from NPR, Times Square suspect's world flipped upside down last summer. In the LA Times, car bomb suspect struggled to find a place. Andrea, it seems like, the media does a fairly good job with the who, what, when, where, why kind of aspect of this story, but then you get a turn like that. Why does that happen?
Well, they don't want to tell the real story that he's a radical Islamic jihadist. I mean, that would be like, I don't see anybody saying that we have a bunch of agitated Mediterraneans against my heritage, the Greeks. But look, there was bias against him, and then there was bias. They use this as an opportunity to go after the GOP. The Washington Post, John, there's a piece in there by Karen Tumulty and Paul Kane, and they actually criticized the GOP for what they call the broader criticism of asking if he was Mirandized. I think that's a very fair point. And then they make the point that, quote, this might reflect the fact that by some measures the Obama administration has prosecuted the war against al-Qaeda more aggressively than his predecessor. No facts to back that up. They just write it. This is not an editorial piece. This is a news piece, and journalists are using this as an opportunity to defend the suspect in question and go after the GOP.
Judy, there are several million Americans who've been foreclosed upon out in the heartland, and we don't see them driving smoking SUVs into Times Square.
Yes, exactly. And I'm having a bad hair day, and I don't go out and hit you over the head, John. I mean, it's the same phenomenon, but there is a difference here. I think we have an obligation as media to try and understand the source of the radicalization that this man went through, allegedly, because he's still innocent and proven guilty. But there's a difference between explaining the radicalization, understanding the who, how, when, what, where, and seeming to sympathize with him or to justify or defend what he did. And I think some of the headlines, if not the stories themselves, cross that line.
A lot of those stories, Jim, centered around the fact that we got lucky this time. But if there had been a much better built bomb and it had gone off in the middle of Times Square, would the coverage have taken a different turn?
Well, good question. I mean, first of all, we should say salute Judy, who wrote a terrific piece for Fox News last week. 10 unanswered questions about this investigation, including all the snafus that mercifully didn't really amount to anything in terms of people getting killed. But as long as we're talking about the sentimentalizing, I guess that would be the phrase for it. They're trying to contextualize him into the savageries of Reaganomics and how cruel it was to working people like him. We should remember the original narrative of this case, which was that it was obviously, as Mayor Bloomberg said, some conservative militia type who was up to doing this. And the classic moment that everybody should remember is Contessa Brewer on MSNBC saying, I was really kind of hoping that this guy would be a right-wing militia type so we could be Timothy McVeigh, we could blame it on Rush Limbaugh. Instead, we're stuck with this jihad stuff, which just isn't nearly as interesting to the mainstream media as
militias. They would never say jihad.
Has there been enough done, Ellis, to point out the mistakes that were made in going after this guy?
Well, I mean, hold on a second. They did a great job. I mean, they arrested him in barely 50 hours. And I'm afraid that my friends today may be confusing sympathy and understanding. It is crucially important that we get inside the mind of this madman. And most of these kinds of people, we learn, I know Judy knows this, come to these horrible acts through a cocktail of motivations, many things swirling together, and a little jihadism, a little family crisis, a little mental illness, and we've got to separate that and understand it, please.
Alice, you're quite right.
We should separate.
We should therefore, now we know why all the millions of people who had their houses foreclosed went and blew up this town squares where they live. Look,
there is a difference. The fact that one person takes a motivation like that and turns it crazy doesn't negate the millions.
What's the variable? The variable is not middle-class homeowner. The variable is Islamic jihadism.
A cocktail of motivation. Well, remember that expression.
But there's very strong liqueur in that cocktail, and that is radical Islamic jihad.
Baptists aren't blowing up Times Square.
Right, exactly.
But there's gin and there's the olive. The gin is what matters.
So we shouldn't report the facts of this guy's life. That's a ridiculous reporting argument.
We should report all of it. The issue is, what's the balance? What does the balance look like? And if you don't use the word Islamic in a story, I'm sorry, you can't describe what happened to Faisal Shabab.
Nobody would suggest that there is no Islamic angle in this. But
the White House never used the term.
To claim that this factual, terrific reporting that our colleagues have done is somehow biased or inappropriate, it does them a disservice. It really does.
Alice, when you say Islamic angle, that's like, it's not the angle, it's the hook.
Right.
It's the peg.
Gin, vermouth, ice, a glass. I want to know about all of it.
It's like 7 parts gin, though, and they're not